When I think back to that summer, it's hard not to feel that familiar sting in my chest. It was the summer I lost everything, or at least everything that I thought mattered at the time. My parents, in a decision that will forever remain a sharp memory in my mind, took my sister on vacation instead of me. I still remember the early days of that summer break. My sister, Ava, practically glowed with excitement as she spoke about the trip. A 2-week getaway to the Caribbean, and they chose her over me. They claimed it was because I'd been doing poorly in school, but I knew the truth. Ava was their golden child, the one they always counted on. She got the grades, made the right friends, did all the right things, and me, I was just me, struggling to make it through another year of high school. It wasn't even that I had failed, just that I hadn't excelled, hadn't shone bright enough to outshine Ava's blinding brilliance. As I watched them drive off to the airport, Ava in the back seat waving at me with her self-satisfied smile, I knew that something had to change. I couldn't take it anymore. The constant comparisons, the endless reminders that I was somehow less deserving. A rage simmered inside me that day, a rage that I didn't even know I was capable of. And somewhere in the heat of that anger, an idea sparked, a plan that I couldn't let go of. Ava was going to pay. Now, don't get me wrong, it wasn't anything sinister, at least not at first. I didn't want to hurt her physically or anything like that. I just wanted her to feel the same emptiness that I did. I wanted her to experience what it felt like to be forgotten, discarded, and ignored. I wanted her to know that her actions had consequences. That's when I started plotting her sweet, non-standard revenge. The idea first came to me when I stumbled upon Ava's Instagram. She had, of course, been posting about the trip, tagging her friends, and making sure they all saw just how wonderful her life was. That's when I realized the power of her image. Ava was addicted to the idea of being perfect, and if I could ruin that image, maybe I could get through to her. Maybe, just maybe, she would learn that things can fall apart even for golden children. The first step was to do a little digging. My parents had foolishly left me with Ava's old laptop while they were away. It wasn't hard to find her password, a combination of her name, and some numbers that seemed like her birth date. It was practically begging to be guessed. What I found inside wasn't exactly groundbreaking, but it was enough to set things in motion. There were messages, lots of them, some private chats with her friends, others with people she clearly shouldn't have been talking to, conversations about sneaking out, drinking, and even shoplifting. Just like that, the Golden Girl's shine seemed a little tarnished. I knew I couldn't go straight to our parents. That would have made it all too easy for Ava to worm her way out. Instead, I decided to involve her friends, those people she was so desperate to impress. I set up a group chat, an anonymous account posing as a random follower who had stumbled upon her incriminating messages. I started dropping hints, leaving little breadcrumbs for her friends to find. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash as her perfect facade began to crack. Her friends began to question her, the rumors started spreading, and Ava's shiny world started to crumble. But I wasn't done yet. I had heard them mention the hotel they were staying at, a fancy resort that was, without a doubt, overhyped and overpriced. I did some digging online, learning about the resort's rules and restrictions. With a few carefully crafted emails, I managed to anonymously inform the management about some disturbing activities involving a certain young guest. I made it seem like Ava was involved in things that would draw their attention, underage drinking, potential theft, and more. It wasn't long before Ava was called in for questioning, her vacation quickly turning into a nightmare. I still remember the first time I heard from Ava after everything fell apart. She called me from the resort, her voice breaking as she tried to explain what had happened. She sounded desperate, terrified even, and a small part of me almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But I remembered how it felt watching her leave, how it felt to be the one left behind. So, I listened to her frantic pleas, her cries for help, and I told her the one thing she had told me 1,000 times before. Figure it out yourself, Ava. You're the golden child, remember? And I hung up. Ava's problems didn't end there. The resort's management called the police when they found out she'd been sneaking alcohol into her room. The staff didn't take kindly to the disruption, especially in a place where everything was meant to be perfect. Her story about how it wasn't her fault, how someone had set her up, didn't seem to help either. She was escorted out, her vacation cut short in the worst way possible. My parents had to fly back early, furious and embarrassed. By the time Ava returned home, the police had let her go, but not without a warning and a lot of paperwork to deal with. Ava was different when she got back. The proud girl who left for vacation had been replaced by someone else, someone quieter, more unsure of herself. Her friends had distanced themselves from her, rumors had spread far beyond her control, and my parents looked at her with disappointment in their eyes. I should have felt triumphant, like I'd finally gotten what I wanted. But there was something hollow about it all, an emptiness I didn't expect. Days passed and our house grew tense, quieter than it had ever been. Ava avoided me, keeping to her room most of the time. My parents were too busy dealing with the fallout to notice me, even though that had been what I wanted in the first place. Eventually, I realized something. This revenge, this act of sabotage, hadn't made me feel any better. Ava was broken, and somehow, it didn't fix the brokenness in me. I had done this terrible thing, and now we were both left with nothing but emptiness. One night, I heard Ava crying in her room, the muffled sobs echoing down the hall. For the first time since the whole ordeal started, I felt something other than anger. I felt guilt. I remembered how I'd felt standing on that driveway, watching them leave without me. I had wanted Ava to understand what it was like to be hurt, but maybe I'd gone too far. Maybe I hadn't wanted her to suffer like this. I knocked softly on her door, hesitating for a moment before pushing it open. Ava was curled up on her bed, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked at me, her expression a mix of anger and exhaustion. She didn't say anything, and neither did I. Instead, I walked over and sat beside her, the silence between us heavy and uncomfortable. "I'm sorry," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Ava looked at me, her eyes searching my face as if trying to understand why I had done it. I wasn't sure I even understood myself. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad." Ava didn't respond right away. She just stared at me, the anger slowly fading from her eyes, replaced by something else, something softer, more vulnerable. Finally, she sighed, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Why did you do it?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Why would you do this to me?" I took a deep breath, the words catching in my throat. "Because I was tired of always being left behind, tired of feeling like I didn't matter. I wanted you to understand what it felt like." Ava nodded slowly, her gaze dropping to the floor. For a long time, neither of us said anything. It was as if the weight of everything that had happened was pressing down on us, making it hard to breathe. Eventually, Ava looked at me again, her expression softer. "You could have just talked to me, you know. You didn't have to do all this." I swallowed hard, the guilt gnawing at me. "I know. I didn't think you'd listen." Ava sighed, a sad smile tugging at her lips. "I'm listening now." It wasn't much, but it was a start. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ava and I talked, really talked. We talked about everything that had happened, about how we both felt, about the things we had never said to each other. It wasn't easy, and there were a lot of tears, but it felt like we were finally beginning to understand each other. The walls we had built between us started to crumble, and for the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could start to heal. In the end, the revenge I had plotted didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it would. It didn't fix the hurt or make everything better, but it did lead to something I hadn't expected. It led to a chance for Ava and me to rebuild our relationship, to find a way to be sisters again. And maybe that was worth more than any revenge I could have ever imagined. It had been a few months since that summer, since everything fell apart, and then, somehow, came back together again. My sister Ava and I were still finding our way back to each other, step by step. Things weren't perfect. They were far from it. But at least now, we were both trying. The tension that once filled our house had eased, replaced by an uneasy truce that slowly grew more comfortable as we learned to talk, to listen, to forgive. The aftermath of everything that happened still lingered, though. Ava's reputation had taken a hit that she was struggling to recover from. People at school still whispered about her, her friends were still distant, and she had become more withdrawn, spending more time at home. My parents were still disappointed in both of us, though they tried to hide it. They had forgiven Ava, more or less, but their trust in me was shaky at best. They hadn't yet figured out the whole truth, but they knew I had played a part in Ava's unraveling. I was determined to make it up to her, to prove that I could be the sister she deserved. It wasn't going to be easy, and I knew that, but I also knew that I couldn't just leave things the way they were. Ava deserved better. She deserved a sister who would be there for her, who would stand by her side instead of tearing her down. And maybe, if I could do that, I could finally start to feel like I deserved to be part of this family too. One Friday evening, as I sat in my room trying to focus on my homework, Ava knocked on my door. She didn't usually come to my room, so I looked up, surprised. She was standing in the doorway, her expression uncertain, her eyes tired. "Hey," she said, her voice barely audible. "Can I come in?" I nodded, setting my textbook aside. "Yeah, of course." Ava walked in, closing the door behind her before sitting on the edge of my bed. She was quiet for a moment, as if she was trying to find the right words. Finally, she spoke. "I've been thinking, maybe we should do something together. Just the two of us. I don't know, like a road trip or something. Get away for a while." I blinked, taken aback by the suggestion. Ava and I hadn't spent time together like that in years, not since we were kids. "A road trip?" I asked, trying to gauge if she was serious. She nodded, her expression softening a little. "Yeah, I think it could be good for us. I mean, we're both kind of stuck right now, you know? Maybe getting away could help us figure things out." I studied her face, the vulnerability in her eyes. It took me a moment, but then I realized what this was. An olive branch, an attempt to move forward. And despite everything, despite the guilt and the fear that things could fall apart again, I wanted that too. I wanted a chance to make things right, to rebuild what we had lost. "Okay," I said, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Let's do it. A road trip sounds good." Ava smiled, a real smile, one that I hadn't seen in what felt like forever. "Really?" she asked, her eyes brightening a little. "Yeah, really," I replied, feeling a strange mix of hope and nervousness. "Let's get out of here for a while." The following week, we started planning. We didn't tell our parents right away. We both knew they'd be hesitant to let us go, especially considering everything that had happened. But eventually, we managed to convince them. It took a lot of promises, that we'd be careful, that we'd call every day, that we'd stick to safe places. But in the end, they agreed. I think they saw how much we needed this, how much we needed each other. We packed up my old car, a beat-up hand-me-down that barely ran but was ours all the same, and set out early one Saturday morning. We didn't have a set destination, just a general direction. South, towards warmer weather, towards somewhere that wasn't here. The car was loaded with snacks, a couple of duffel bags filled with clothes, and a playlist that Ava had put together. It felt like an adventure, like the start of something new, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of excitement. The first few hours were quiet. Ava and I weren't used to talking, not like this. We had spent so much time at odds with each other that it felt strange to be in the same space, sharing the same experience. But slowly, as the miles stretched on and the landscape changed around us, the tension began to ease. We talked about little things at first, the music on the radio, the places we passed, the people we used to know. And then, as the sun started to set, our conversation turned to the harder things. "I know I wasn't always fair to you," Ava said suddenly, her eyes on the road ahead. "I know I acted like I was better than you, like you didn't matter. And I'm sorry for that." I glanced at her, her profile outlined by the fading light. Her words hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. I took a deep breath, my hands tightening on the steering wheel. "I know I hurt you," I said, my voice barely audible. "I wanted you to feel what I felt, but I went too far. I'm so sorry, Ava." She looked at me then, her eyes meeting mine for a brief moment before she turned back to the road. "I know," she said, her voice soft. "I get it now. I think we both just got lost for a while." I nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, but maybe we can find our way back." Ava smiled, a small, hopeful smile. "Maybe we can." The rest of the trip was different, easier. We laughed more, we sang along to the radio, we stopped at random roadside attractions just because we could. We took pictures, we made memories, and for the first time in what felt like forever, we were just sisters again. No resentment, no anger, no walls between us, just us, together, figuring things out 1 mile at a time. One night, we camped out under the stars, the sky stretching out above us in a vast expanse of glittering lights. We lay on our backs, the ground hard beneath us, the air cool and crisp. "Do you think we'll ever really be okay?" Ava asked, her voice quiet, almost lost in the night. I thought about it for a moment, the weight of everything we had been through pressing down on me. "I think we will," I said finally, turning my head to look at her. "Maybe not right away. Maybe it'll take time. But I think we'll get there." Ava smiled, her eyes shining in the starlight. "Yeah, I think so too." We fell silent then, the only sound the rustling of the wind through the trees and the distant hum of the highway. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I didn't know what the future held for us, didn't know if we'd be able to keep this fragile truce once we got back home, but I knew that we had this moment, this night under the stars, this chance to start over. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. When we finally returned home, things weren't magically fixed. There were still whispers at school, still moments when our parents looked at us with disappointment. But there was also something new, a sense of understanding, a bond that hadn't been there before. Ava and I weren't perfect, and we still had a long way to go, but we were trying. And for the first time, that felt like enough. We had faced the darkness together, had seen each other at our worst, and we had chosen to forgive. And maybe that was the real revenge. Not the hurt, not the pain, but the choice to let go of it all and find our way back to each other. To choose love, even when it was hard. To be sisters again, in the truest sense of the word. And as I watched Ava laugh, really laugh, for the first time in months, I knew that whatever happened next, we'd face it together. And maybe, just maybe, that was all we really needed.